Welcome to Voices of Homelessness. Voices of Homelessness is produced by the National Coalition for the Homeless. Our goal with the Voices of Homeless podcast is to help you understand the real picture of homelessness by hearing directly from people who have experienced homelessness. We thank you for tuning in tonight. We have a couple of very amazing guests, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in just a couple of minutes. But our goal at the National Coalition for the Homeless is to end homelessness once and for all. And I hope that you'll join us. I hope that these stories that you hear will help guide you to some sort of practice that will allow you to be a part of the solution. We are the richest country in the history of the world. And in the richest country in the history of the world, we should not have homelessness. And we are hoping today that you and people that are in your circle, in your network, in your sphere of influence can help us towards the goal of ending it once and for all. So I thank you again. And here we are with the Voices of Homelessness. And I have two amazing guests. One is Christina Garcia. Christina is a staff member at the Coalition for the Homeless, the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and I think she's based out of Denver, but she'll tell you that herself. And we'll have Kelvin Lassiter. Kelvin actually works with the National Coalition for the Homeless, based in Washington, D.C. And today we just want to dig in a little bit to their stories and help put a real face to the voices of homelessness. We want to also thank our production staff, Reel to Real Productions, Kalita Harris, who just does an amazing job. We want to thank you. And at the end of the day, we hope you'll become a part of the effort we have ongoing to end homelessness in America. So Christina and Kelvin, welcome to Voices of Homelessness.
Thank you, Donald. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Donald. Delighted to be here.
Okay. And so, Kelvin, we're going to start with you. So tell us a little bit about your story, as much as you want to share. How did you get here? What was it like? And where are you at now?
Thank you very much, Donald. Before I get started, I just wanted to say thank you to my colleagues, Christina and Coletta, for allowing me to be here today, and also to our host of this podcast today, Donald Whitehead, for allowing me to speak. And I don't take it lightly each time I have a chance to educate the public about homelessness. So I grew up middle class. I'm a little different from most. My father at the time served in the United States Navy, actually retired from the United States Navy. My mother was a local bank clerk at a local bank here in Washington, D.C. that's now defunct. And I didn't experience being poor till I became an adult. But what happened is we traveled around the country due to my father's military obligations. Our family became dysfunctional. He served in Vietnam, and when he returned, he just wasn't the same person, and that's understandable. Unfortunately, the relationship between him and my mother disintegrated, and it had a profound effect on our family. And you throw in the death of my grandmother, my father's mother, my mother developing breast cancer at 35 and having a baby 6 months before that, changed the whole dynamic of our family. And I'm gonna fast forward a little bit due to the respective time. They decided to buy a house, even with all the drama that was going on between them. It was a dream of my father's. And that dream was fulfilled. However, it didn't last. So what happened one day, my mother gets a call at work from the mortgage company. And they shared with her that my parents were 8 months behind on their mortgage to the tune of $5,000. And our house was being sold at an auction the same day. Now, my mother was furious. One, because my father didn't share that information with her. And two, my mother actually had the $5,000 in the bank. but it was too late to save the house. And at that point, my mother wasn't really sure if she even wanted to, because their relationship, they weren't on good terms. So the owner who bought the property did not require us to move because he wanted to use it as rental property. Well, we fast forward about 8 months. I have graduated from high school, and the phone rings again. And this time it's the landlord. And he says, may I speak to Mr. Lassiter? I said, well, he's not here right now. And he said, well, who is this? I said, well, this is his son. And he said, well, tell your father you all have 30 days to move. Click. So I'm looking at the phone. The phone kind of looks back at me, as to say, what you gonna do? So I had to call my mother. Now keep in mind, she's still furious for what happened 8 months earlier. So I called her, and I was used a voice that just wasn't my natural nature. And she could tell that, that's how moms are. And she said, what's wrong? And I said, well, the landlord called, said we have 30 days to move. And she took the phone away from her ear. I took the phone away from my ear, excuse me. And she was hollering and screaming, and she forgot she was at work. Well, needless to say, 30 days later, we were moving. First time we were homeless. I went to sleep on someone's couch. My mother and sister went to stay with relatives, and my father, to this day, I still don't know where he was staying. And it didn't get any better for a while, for a few months, actually. My mother applied to 11 companies to get an apartment, 11. She was turned down 11 times. The 12th time, somebody said yes. Now, why is that important? It's important because her name was still attached to that mortgage. So now she had bad credit. Therefore, people didn't want to take a chance, but somebody took a chance on that 12th time. And that's why it's important not to quit. So we had an apartment, me and my sister and my mother shared that for a little while till my mother's cancer return, became terminal a few years after that. And she went in the hospital, stayed in the hospital for about 6 months. Doctor said there's nothing more we could do. They sent her home. She lived about another year and a half. She died in my arms in the hospital. And that for me was just devastating, along with my sister. She was only 11 at the time. And it was a downhill experience after that. Shortly after, I was in school actually at the time for office administration. So I took some time away from that, just kind of hit the streets a little bit. Was in a state of depression, quite frankly. I didn't think about it till later on why, I took the actions the way I did. But I don't know if anybody could have handled that situation. So I fast forward a little bit and started drinking real heavily and, using drugs. And I stopped caring about myself. That's the bottom line. And then I ended up on the streets, literally. But I always had a job. That was the interesting thing. I always kept a job. So people didn't know I was homeless because I kept my appearance up. I didn't have the traditional, stereotypical homeless look that people think homeless people look like. The shopping cart, the disheveled appearance, the soiled trench coat. I had slacks, shirt, tie, dress shoes. Most of the time, that's what I wore. And I kept my belongings. Back then in the late 80s, the bus stations had lockers, so you can keep your clothes in a locker. So I did that. The places I worked at, they had gyms. I'd keep my clothes in the gym locker. And that's how I functioned for quite some time. And that lasted for about 2 years. And then the final bout with homelessness, same deal, making bad choices, still dealing with the depression. But this second time around, I was staying in the largest shelter in DC, which is called Community for Creative Nonviolence, or as we nickname it, Second and D here in Washington, DC. Stayed there, and I looked in the mirror, and I was 38 years old at the time, and I was getting gray hair. Yes, I had hair at one time. I could prove it. I got pictures just to prove it. But I didn't like what I saw. The mirror doesn't lie. So I decided to make a change, as the song Man in the Mirror says. And at the same time, ironically, a Baptist preacher came in and started pouring into my life, just shared with me that you don't have to live this way. You can, you can regroup. And I knew a little something about the Bible and the book he shared, other books he shared with me, because my mother took us to church, me and my sister, through all that drama. So I started listening to him, reading Bible, and within a year's time, a year, I got a full-time job, and I was staying at the house that this preacher bought. It was a recovery home for men. And uh, from that point forward, again, I started working, and it's a saying that I can't take credit for. It says it's not good for man to be alone, and I literally took that into consideration, even though I was not in a position to be with somebody. I, tried my hand anyway. And this lady I was in Bible study with, uh, decided to go out with me on a date. I struck up enough nerve, and lo and behold, uh, from that day forward, we haven't been apart since, and that's been 18 years now. And life is a lot different than it was almost 20 years ago. I went to school and went to college, studied psychology. I'm 2 math credits short away from my psychology degree, which I plan on obtaining within the next year or so. I'm also now a published author, and I'm working on another book as we speak called Surviving the Storm: The Poor Will Bear Fruit in America, which will discuss homelessness and policies and how policy contributes to homelessness in America. And it will be filled with a bunch of stories from people who are currently and formerly homeless. And last but not least, I'm doing work with the National Coalition for the Homeless as an income policy analyst. And I had one executive director, the podcast host, who took a chance on me and gave me an opportunity to shine and use my talents to help people who are still homeless, because you never want to forget where you came from. So that's where I am right now today. And the book is still being written. So thank you very much for allowing me to share.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I'll have some questions for you later, but we definitely want to give Christina, the opportunity to share her experience. And then we'll jump into some questions. Christina, just whatever you'd feel comfortable sharing with us. We'd love to hear that amazing story of yours. So please take it away.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you for sharing your story, Kelvin. It's very inspirational. I look forward to reading that book. I am honored to be here. I haven't really shared my story out, but I come from San Francisco. I'm born of a Puerto Rican and Mexican parents, and in San Francisco, I grew up, with my parents who were both addicted to drugs and had a really rough time being stable and providing for my sister and I. And so, I experienced living in the projects of Potrero Hill in San Francisco, and living in motels and all of that as a child. I remember going to Glide Memorial for lunch often, and as a kid, you get accustomed to your experiences. And so I thought that I had a wonderful childhood growing up. I didn't realize until I was older that there was a lot of undealt with trauma that resurfaced when I was older. So in my 20s, or actually before then, I joined a gang in San Francisco after I was separated from my mom. I was still looking for that connection with others. And so living in foster homes, it led me to the streets of the Mission District in San Francisco. And there I learned how to do it all, right? So I got addicted to drugs myself, and some really heavy drugs. I was on intravenous cocaine and heroin for years. I was able to hold a job down, surprisingly, just like Kelvin, during that time. But it got to a point where, my drug abuse got really out of control. My first daughter was born when I was 21 years old and lived with me until she was 4. I had a lot of different places that I would stay, and it wasn't a great environment for her. And so when her father petitioned for custody, I didn't fight it. I knew that I needed to give her a better chance. And so after I didn't have Ruby, it was really hard for me to I didn't have any anchor after that. And so that's when I lived on the streets for the next 5 years. I remember sleeping in, doorways in San Francisco, staying at different, motels if I could afford it. And then my mom ended up getting out of prison and didn't have anywhere to go. And so that's when I had a little bit of motivation to take care of someone else. And so I remember making sure after that I always had her in one of the motels. Like, we would never sleep on the street. And so I really, busted my butt to make sure that she had somewhere to be. And that involved selling drugs. It was, as a woman being out on the street, there aren't many other options of how to make money. And it's hard enough falling asleep on the streets as a woman, because I would wake up and find out I had been raped at night. And so I didn't want that to happen to my mom. So instead of selling myself, I was selling drugs, which is something I'm not proud of because there's so much stereotypes about people who sell drugs. But a lot of it was to fund my own addiction and to keep my mom from being on the street. Well, that led me to go to prison. And so I finally got convicted in 2009. I was arrested in 2008 and sent to prison in 2009. And, that was a blessing in disguise for me. I feel really grateful to have been sent to prison, surprisingly. I remember when the judge was sentencing me, normally you have a chance to fight and keep pushing for a lighter sentence, right? And I was like, no, I want to take this. I need this. I need a break. And I need enough time away from the streets to get my head right. And so I went off to prison in California. And at the time, there were 2 prisons, and one of them was for the women of Southern California, which is like most of the Sureños, which is the gangs that I was associated with. And then there's one for Northern California, which was like the rival people. And I was from Northern California, but a Sureña up there. And so I got a full tour of the prison system in California because I was transferred to the other prison because of my status. And, during the time that I was there, I think one of the biggest things that I worried about was whether or not I would ever see the light of day. Because once you're in there, you're just a number, and nobody believes anything that you have to say. I only had about 6 months left in my time. And so as a short timer, you're subject to violence. And so I always just wondered, will I ever leave? But thankfully, I had an opportunity to sign up for a program where I completed the last couple months of my sentence in a locked facility in Richmond, California, which coincidentally was where my daughter was living. I hadn't seen her in several years by that time. And so just having that close proximity with my daughter really kept me motivated to do what I had to do to find myself again, and to get right. And so I completed that program, but knew I needed more. It was a lifelong abuse that I had, and so I needed more time to really work on myself. And so I signed up for another program at Walden House in San Francisco, and there I lived with like 400 other women in this old monastery, and it was such a great experience. It really focused on work and myself, and I completed that program successfully and said, nope, I still need more. And so I signed up for the extension to that, where it was like a lower level of care, so to speak, at a smaller house with just 7 other women. And at that time, I got a job working as an employment specialist, which was really great. I really enjoy serving the community. And as an employment specialist, I was able to serve people that had developmental disabilities, find employment. My mom came back out of prison at that time, and went back out to the streets. And I would go see her, and I was working. And so I called up my sister in Colorado, and she welcomed me with open arms, and I moved out here. And since living here, I have enrolled back in school. I completed 2 degrees. The first one was in human services. And then I found out that college didn't necessarily, they had lost their accreditation. And so when I went to go get my master's degree, they said, no, you have to start all over. So I went back and I started all over and got my bachelor's degree in business. But I still count them both because I put in the work for both. And I got a position here at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And like Kelvin, I feel like really honored to be here because they also gave a chance. They took a chance on me. And I got a position as a housing specialist, like looking for housing for people that were experiencing homelessness. And I have fallen in love. This is my calling here. The first day of work here, I saw someone who had been homeless for 20 years receive the keys to his apartment, and he just broke down. And just to be witness to someone's experience, and being able to see that, just really helped me see that this is what I need to be doing. So I've been here for the last 8 years, and I currently, serve over 1,700 people here, and we make sure that they keep their housing. We work with landlords in the community, and we're always educating them on the experiences of people, while they're homeless and why they deserve a chance to get into housing. But yeah, so that's me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Such powerful stories, and thank you both for being willing to share some very personal information and a real journey to where you are today. And thank you for being part of the solution. Just love to, in the time that we have remaining, just kind of get your thoughts about like the system that's very imperfect that we work in, that's designed to help people, but not really designed by the people who've had your experiences. So the first thing I would ask you is like, what part of the system was most helpful in terms of the homeless system? If you could think of one thing that was the most beneficial to you, what would that be? What program, what individual, just if you could both talk a little bit about that. And I have 10 more questions, but want you guys to address that one first.
Okay, I'll go first, Kelvin, if that's okay. So what was really helpful about the system, what I loved most about the program was having staff that had lived experience. I felt that other staff that didn't really couldn't relate or understand anything that I had been through. One of the challenges, and I know this isn't the question, but I want to speak to this, was that I had wanted to access, recovery so much sooner, but they would always say, you have to come back Monday at this time. And living on the street, that's really hard to keep to. And it took going to prison in order for me to qualify or like be in the right place at the right time to access those services. And that shouldn't have to be the experience of everyone else. And so, programs that are flexible with their intake times would be really helpful.
Recovery on demand would be a good thing, huh? Kelvin, did you want to speak to what part of the system was most beneficial, most helpful to you?
Yes, thank you, Donald. So for me, because I was a person who was employed, a lot of the time when you try to sign up for a shelter or get into a shelter at night, you could not, because you had to sign up by 4, 5, or 6 p.m. And if you're a working person, you might not get off till 4, 5, or 6 p.m. So at CCNV, or Community for Creative Nonviolence, they would allow you, especially if you're a working person, they showed some leeway, and it's a 24-hour operational shelter. So for me, that was really huge because I didn't have to worry about having my things on the street or carry my things with me all the time. And it kind of, even in the midst of that situation, it kind of gave me a sense of calmness, that there was one place that I did not have to have that issue of being kicked out at 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning and not have somewhere to go if I wasn't working. So there are some shelters like that, congregate shelters, although I have mixed reviews on that system of congregate shelters, but that particular one was very beneficial. And the last one that I stayed at, which was a men's outreach center, had the same setup. So it allowed me to regroup and restore my dignity.
Thank you. Both very important and mostly missing elements of the system that would really be beneficial. You also both talked a little bit, Christina, more you about the experience of peer support. Would either of you be in favor of a system that would be kind of led by people with lived experience? And if you had to design your own system, what would it look like?
So absolutely, a peer-led support system. Again, I related most and got the most hope from people that had lived and walked through the same circumstances as myself. Your second question is pretty loaded. If I had to design my own system, it wouldn't be a system. I feel like everyone is unique, and I have real issue with us requiring people to fit inside our boxes in order to get the services that they need. And so, it would be a very individualized non-system.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very important. Kelvin?
Yes, and thank you for that answer, Christina, and that question, Donald. So for me, yes, I am in favor of peer support, and here's why. So when you're out on the street, you'll find that the people you interact with who may be homeless as well may come from a similar background. So you're able to relate to one another, and you may not even know that person's background as well. And you never know who you're going to run across as well. So that's why I'm in favor of peer support. And the case in point to that, so when I was staying in the Community for Creative Nonviolence, or Second at D, I ran across a gentleman who looked very familiar, but I just could not remember his name because some decades had passed by from when I had last saw him. And the gentleman he was speaking to, they departed, and the other gentleman called his name out and said, "Well, take care, Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, stay safe." Mr. Lee was my 7th grade math teacher. So I said, if it could happen to him, it could happen to anybody. And his education level is still happening to him. So that kind of motivated me. And to Christina's point, it would not be a system. Number one thing I would do, it would be led by current and formerly homeless people. There would be no people who have not been homeless or who have read about homelessness in school. They need to be able to relate to people who are currently and formerly homeless. Now, that's not a knock against people who have education level and they ascended to a position that they're in. What I'm basically saying is it would be difficult to relate to the person for experiences that they have not experienced themselves. And the other thing I would design it would be huge is making sure that people's benefits were not taken away from them because they're homeless or they are at a certain educational level or a certain income level. So those two things would be the beginning of the design of the program, not a system, but a program that I would do featuring peer support.
Thank you. So both of you kind of spoke to a need for a system that's more catered to anybody versus catered to one kind of homeless person. So I wanted to also kind of, hopefully there's some providers, maybe some elected officials hearing. So when you talk about the systems, both of you talked a little bit about some of the barriers, whether it's not having treatment on demand or whether it's not being able to have a system that allows you to work, especially like the big one is usually when people have to work overnight or any kind of odd hours. What are some of the other barriers you faced, even in your actual homeless situations? What are some of the barriers that you faced out there on the street? Was there any interaction with law enforcement? Were there people who were either negative towards you, or even like in some cases, there were people, we track every year the number of hate crimes out there. So any of you deal with any of that? Either of you deal with any of that on the street?
Yeah. So as a woman out in the street, it was pretty, like I said, difficult to navigate that piece. And so, I was tired of, getting abused every single night. And so I would not take care of my appearance, right? But then as my appearance went down, I would also get really bad stares, or people would treat me very, very differently because I was no longer, put together. People would even cross the street to not interact with me, and to touch on the police aspect of that, I feel like at no point did they ever treat me like I was a human at any interaction that I had. And I would hear things like, you spick, or, just racial slurs. And, going to jail while you are detoxing, you are the worst of the worst. And I just remember just dying every single time. Like literally, I felt like I was dying, in the cells. And there was no compassion whatsoever. And no one, I know I didn't want to live like that. And again, many times wanted to seek help. And no interaction with police did they ever offer any support or resources. And yeah, that really makes it even more difficult once I got my life back together. Just the rebuilding of my self-confidence and like finding my voice again, and all of that, I think would have been a lot easier if I had never stopped feeling like a human.
Mm-hmm. Wow, very powerful. Kelvin, did you want to touch on either of those?
I do. Thank you, Donald. So one time that will stand out for me for the rest of my life in particular is when, and I don't know if Christina had faced this, and I'm sure she may have, but I got really sick and I have asthma. So I already have, a strike against me being homeless when I was homeless because I had asthma. But when you have asthma, you're susceptible to lung diseases such as pneumonia and other diseases. And that's what happened to me. I caught pneumonia when I was homeless, and because I was sleeping in parked cars, parked benches, just wherever I could when I couldn't get into a shelter. So I went to seek treatment at Unity Healthcare, which is one of our providers here for indigent people in Washington, D.C. And they diagnosed me with pneumonia and said I needed to have 3 days rest inside. So what do you do when you're homeless and you're wondering, well, how does that work? You know, I don't have nowhere to go to have 3 days inside. So there's a place called Central Union Mission here in Washington, D.C. It still exists. And they have been serving men since the late 1800s. So I went to them, had my medical documentation, and I stayed there frequently. But this particular time, the person who was in charge recognized me and said, "Oh, okay." And he kind of backed up a little bit, like, "I don't want to catch what you got, you know." But he said, "You're allowed to stay. Yeah, come on in for 3 days. But you cannot go upstairs to the residence dorm until the nighttime. This is where you're going to stay for the daytime." And he pointed to a pew, a church pew. So I had to sleep on a hard church pew for about 8-9 hours throughout the daytime before I could go into a direct room or go upstairs to the residence dorm. So that's one time I really faced some adversity. And it was a program run by Christian people. So that for me just, was inexcusable because I knew a little something about Christianity. And the second time was to speak to the police experience. I had some guys that I hung with, and one of them just happened to be the best man at my wedding 18 years ago. We were sleeping on a park bench. Let me clarify that. Not together on a park bench. We were sleeping 3 separate individual benches. And the police comes along, and this is 1:30, 2:30 in the morning, kicks us out, pour water on us, and call us bums and all kind of stuff. So
and that was the actual police department.
Yes. The the United States Park Police, because here in Washington, D.C., if you're in a park, that's considered federal property, not city property.
Wow. So, and you often hear stories about, how people are treated and the lack of empathy. And we've certainly seen what that can result in. We've had a number of really tragic encounters with police departments around the country. But just the lack of empathy really kind of really is jarring when you hear it directly. You guys both have such amazing experiences, and I think we should have booked you guys for 2 different shows. But I do want to close out with just like your final thoughts. If you're talking to our elected officials, and you had 5. Well, we actually have 6 minutes left. But if you had 2 minutes to tell them exactly what they need to do to end homelessness, can you please tell us what that would be? What you would say? I'm the representative from your community. What would you tell me would be the solution to ending homelessness in America? And Kelvin, why don't you go first?
Yes, so thank you very much for that question, Donald. So if I had the opportunity to address you as a city, state, or federal legislator, I would just simply say to you, Councilman or Congressman Whitehead, thank you for the time you allowed me to have today. I think one of the things, there are several things, that you need to do to solve homelessness. Number one is you need to have someone who has experienced homelessness on your staff to advise you. Not somebody who went to college and read about it, but somebody who actually has lived it. Number two, Legislator Whitehead, I would absolutely share with you that the dollars that was invested in housing for HUD pre-Ronald Reagan days and during his administration need to be restored because they were cut. Another thing I would share with you as well is that you need to eliminate the red tape that it takes for somebody to get housing. There is no reason why it should take 8 to 11 years for somebody to be on a waiting list to get housing. That is absolutely ridiculous in the United States of America. One other thing I would share with you as well is we need to improve our nation's housing stock. There's a lack of housing in our community that you cannot build more land. We're not going to get no more land. So you need to be able to improve the housing stock, take away the restrictions such as redlining and zoning. And the last thing I would probably share with you, sir, is that make sure that the continuum of cares are having people on their boards and in their organizations have homeless participation in their units as well.
Thanks.
There are many more things I could share, but I'll close out with that.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Your 2 minutes are up anyway, so we have to. So we'll go to Christina. Christina, can you please share? And thank you for that, Kelvin. Christina, please share what you would say.
Thank you. I would just say that the solution to homelessness is housing, but not housing as we define it. It's whatever it is that a person defines as housing, and us to be able to support that. I would love for us to have housing that doesn't have restrictions for backgrounds or evictions or any other systemic barriers that have been placed, and people having a chance to create community. So wrapping that housing with services, I think that the link that crossed me over from being lost on the street to where I am now is that community piece. Whether it's through family or people that we choose as family. And so once we are in housing, we develop community. We're meant to be together. We're not meant to be alone as humans, and so we need each other to recover.
Thank you so much. This has been just an amazing conversation. I wish you guys were able to be here every day, or be with us when we go to the Hill, because you really make an amazing impression on people. Christina, I can't say how much of an impression you've made on the board of directors of the National Coalition. And there's a big surprise for you this week. I won't tell you what it is, but you have really made an impression. People really see the charisma that you bring, the true passion, and really the real goal that you bring to the table is ending homelessness for everybody, and from just a genuine perspective. And we thank you for that. And Kelvin, the same for you. You've really interjected into the staff at the National Coalition just a passion and an experience that can't be matched. And we thank you both for your contributions. We thank you all for joining us today. This has been a wonderful program, and we hope that you'll share it widely with people who have the ability to make a difference in your community and across the country. The National Coalition for the Homeless is the oldest organization that works on these issues in the country, but we need your support. So you'll see in the credits, the National Coalition for the Homeless, our website, www.nationalhomeless.org. Please help support ending homelessness. It takes money to do advocacy, and we hope that you'll join us. And if you can't join us that way, please carry the message that we do not have to have homelessness in the richest country in the history of the world. So I thank you very much. This has been Voices of Homelessness, and please enjoy your life. Please reach out to somebody that's suffering and help them get to the next phase.